Thank you, everybody, for coming to the College Football Betting with Aaron Torres YouTube channel. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Go ahead, click that subscribe button. It helps our channel grow. It helps our audience grow. I appreciate it more than you know as we're talking college football on this channel year round. Appreciate your support. Click that subscribe button. I've Conference Championship games. It is, in my opinion, still the crown jewel, still the biggest one. It is the SEC championship game. How about this? No longer on CBS. No Gary Danielson, no Vern Lundquist, no Brad Nessler, no Tracy Wolfs. We instead have an SEC championship game on ESPN. It's a new era of the SEC, of college football, and there is no better sign of it being a new era in the SEC than the fact that in year one, Texas is playing Georgia for the league championship. Texas is a 2.5-point favorite. The over-under is set at 49.5. And I'll say this, after all of the goofiness in the SEC to get to this moment in time, there's been times where Tennessee looked really good, where Ole Miss looked really good. I don't know if this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I feel like these have been probably the two best teams. Georgia certainly has the two best wins of anybody really in this league. Texas has been the most consistent team. So let's go ahead and dive in. I think I said it, but if I did not, Texas, a 2.5-point favorite as of Thursday evening. The over-under set at 49.5. Let's start with Texas because, from my perspective, let's go ahead and give credit where it's due. Because when you think of all of these offensive coaches, you think offense, right? When you think Lane Kiffin, you think offense. When you think Josh Heupel, you think offense. When you think Lincoln Riley, you think offense. But what the best offensive coaches do is also play to the strengths and weaknesses of their team. And so I bring it up because we spend so much time focusing on the offense with Texas, and it has been awesome, but it's been a little bit different. And you know why Texas is in this game? It is because Steve Sarkisian has built an elite defense. And I think as time has gone on, they have relied more and more and more on that defense. And so when I look at this game, part of it is, I think you could argue the best, most consistent unit of all four, offense, defense of the Texas and Georgia has been the Texas defense. Overall, top 5 total defense in all of college football. And really on top of it, they do just about everything well. Number 2 pass defense in America behind only Notre Dame. They have a top 15 run defense. And you look at the last couple games. Listen, I know the competition hasn't necessarily been A++ over the last month. But listen, when you can only play who's on your schedule. And Texas has completely dominated, and it has been on the defensive side of the ball. Against Texas A&M, gave up just 248 yards of total offense. Against Kentucky, 232 yards. Against Arkansas, 231 yards. Again, I know those aren't the most dynamic offenses, but you have to give credit where it's due. This defense has been phenomenal. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I think it's interesting. Quinn Ewers gets hurt earlier in the year. I'm tripping over my words here, people. It is late at night. We've been recording all day in the Torres studio. I apologize. But the bottom line is, when you look at the offense for Texas, let's also give credit to Sark as well. You have what we believe to be a first-round pick in Quinn Ewers, but he's been up and down. He's been injured, and you figured out creative ways to get the run game going. Obviously, I think the story last week was Arch Manning coming in a short yardage package. I think that's going to be interesting to monitor, not only for this game, but for the impending college football playoff. And let's also give credit to the Wisner kid, sophomore. I don't know that he was the guy that we all thought was going to be the star of this team when the season opened. But the last 2 games, he's kind of really been the guy. 26 carries, 158 yards against Kentucky, really sealed that game. They just kept giving him the ball. Kentucky couldn't get him off the field. And then 33 carries, 186 yards against Texas A&M. So this Texas team, we think about the offense, we think about the pass game with Quinn Ewers and all those receivers. It is the defense, the run game, the O-line, which has carried them. From the Georgia side of things, what can you say about Georgia that hasn't already been said? I think we've probably talked more about Georgia this season on this show than anybody else. And part of it is they've just played a lot of big games. Started week 1 against Clemson, Kentucky on the road. Obviously, we previewed Auburn. We previewed Tennessee. We previewed the first Texas game. We previewed Bama. So we've talked a lot about Georgia. And I think sometimes with that team, 2 things can be true. They have been one of the more inconsistent teams. But if you want to bet Georgia, the good sign is they have been very good in big games. Think about the big games this season. Alabama struggled out of the gate, were dominant in the second half. Pretty much dominant start to finish, although we'll talk about that against Texas, and pretty dominant start to finish against Tennessee. So against the toughest schedule in the SEC in the three biggest games, I would argue they played one really bad half against Alabama and otherwise were the better team. The problem is you're not always getting that version of Georgia. And I think, listen, you don't have to go back far to talk about what the not best version of Georgia looks like. All you got to do is go back a week ago to the Georgia Tech game. Yes, they won in 8 overtimes, but if you watch that game, they trailed the entire game. Georgia Tech largely outplayed them. And if you're looking for concerns coming into this game, it is the inconsistency pretty much everywhere from Georgia. On defense, they gave up 260 yards rushing against Georgia Tech. They gave up 563 yards overall. And oh, by the way, 260 yards rushing allowed. They only had 108 yards rushing themselves. And oh, by the way, Carson Beck looked better, but we know that he has been up and down this year. It goes without saying, 3 interceptions against Florida a few weeks ago. Took a bunch of sacks in that game. Now, obviously, Florida's playing better, but 2 interceptions against Mississippi State, 3 interceptions against Texas. You go on and on down the list, 3 against Alabama as well. To Carson Beck's credit, he is playing better. No interceptions in the last 3 games, including Tennessee and Georgia Tech. Doesn't change the fact that he has still been inconsistent, even though he's at least not turning the ball over. Let's go ahead and get to our pick in this game. I'll be transparent. I actually like Texas to win, and I like Texas to cover the 2.5. So when I look at this game, what stands out to me is a couple things. First of all, and I sort of mentioned it a minute ago, I do think the perception or conversation about the first Georgia-Texas game was a little bit skewed. You go back to the first, go to Georgia. Let's go to Georgia, Alabama, right? We all agree Alabama was the much better team in the first half, and we all agree Georgia was the better team in the second half. Well, I think when we talk about the Georgia-Texas game, there's this perception that Georgia was dominant start to finish. They really weren't. In that game, you go back to the Georgia-Texas, the first game. Yes, Georgia, to their credit, jumped out to a 23-0 lead at halftime, but also Texas roared back, and it was 23-15 going into the fourth quarter before Georgia was able to put it away. So you want to give them credit for that win, but even in that win, Georgia finished with 175 yards passing. Carson Beck, as I said, had 3 interceptions. They only rushed for 108 yards as well. So it wasn't this dominant across-the-board performance like it is perceived to be by so many. So I don't buy that Georgia dominated the first game, and I just go back to what I said a minute ago. Listen, I still think Georgia, at its best, could be the best team in the country. They've certainly shown it. They beat Texas on the road. They beat Tennessee at home. They beat Clemson on a neutral. I mean, the resume is phenomenal. But at the same time, we don't get the same team, as we've discussed, quarter to quarter, half to half, game to game. And so, yes, I do think we're going to get some version of the best version of Georgia, but are we going to get it for 4 quarters? Is Carson Beck going to keep his head on his shoulders and not do something dumb? Are they going to be able to run the ball, something that they really haven't been able to do? Are they going to be able to move the ball through the air against the best secondary that they've seen all season long? I just don't know, and I just don't see it. I believe, as crazy as it sounds, I think Georgia's ceiling may be higher than Texas's, but I just don't know that we're going to see that ceiling because we've seen that ceiling in such short bursts over the course of the season. So I said it on the Aaron Torres pod. I like Texas to win. I'll be transparent. I forget the score I gave, maybe 28-21, I think is what I said, 28-17, something like that. But I do think Texas wins. I do think they're your SEC champ in the first year in the SEC.